The rain fell in sheets as Michael Parker stood at his mother's grave, raindrops mixing with the tears on his face. It had been 2 weeks since they buried Linda Parker, and the emptiness in his chest felt as vast as the gray sky above. He pulled, his coat tighter around his shoulders, but the chill that had settled in his bones had little to do with the weather. "I'll come back next week, Mom," he whispered, placing a single white rose on the still fresh dirt before turning away. The drive back to his childhood home was automatic, his mind elsewhere as his hands guided the steering wheel through familiar streets. The house stood quiet and dark, just as it had been since the day his mother collapsed in the garden. The doctors called it a heart attack, quick and unexpected for a woman of 62 who had seemed in perfect health just days before. Michael parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, staring at the porch where he'd spent countless summer evenings listening to his mother's stories. With a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and made his way to the front door, keys jingling in his trembling hands. Inside, the house smelled of dust and lingering traces of his mother's perfume. The family lawyer had suggested he start sorting through her belongings soon, but every time Michael tried, he found himself sitting on the floor surrounded by memories, unable to decide what to keep and what to let go. Today would be different, he told himself. Today he would tackle her office, the room she'd always kept immaculately organized and somewhat private. As the only child of a single mother, Michael had grown used to their close relationship, which made the few boundaries she maintained all the more curious. The office door creaked as he pushed it open. Afternoon light filtered through half-drawn curtains, illuminating dancing dust particles in the air. Her desk stood by the window, a solid oak piece that had belonged to her father. Michael ran his fingers along its polished surface before sitting in her chair, feeling like an intruder despite being the only one left to claim her things. He started with the drawers, methodically emptying each one, sorting papers into piles, bills, correspondence, photographs. In the second drawer, beneath a stack of old birthday cards he'd given her over the years, his fingers touched something leather-bound. He pulled out a journal he'd never seen before, its cover worn soft with age and handling. Michael frowned. His mother had never mentioned keeping a journal. He flipped it open, recognizing her neat, slanted handwriting immediately. The first entry was dated nearly 30 years ago, just before he was born. "I don't know if this is the right choice," the entry began. "But sometimes the only way forward is to create a new path entirely. I hope someday I can tell the truth. But for now, this secret stays with me." His heart quickened. What secret? His mother had always seemed so straightforward, so honest. The woman who raised him couldn't keep secrets, or so he'd believed. He flipped through more pages, scanning entries that jumped across years. Most were ordinary reflections on daily life, thoughts about raising him alone, her work as a librarian. But every few pages there would be a cryptic line or two, references to before and after, mentions of a switch and someone called R, who she seemed both afraid of and desperate to contact. As he reached entries from the past year, the I tone changed. The writing became more urgent, less careful. "I saw him today. After all these years standing right there in the grocery store. He didn't see me or pretended not to. Does he know? Has he always known? I can't sleep tonight. I keep checking the locks." Michael's hand shook as he turned to the final pages. The last entry was dated 3 days before her death. "The pain in my chest comes and goes. Dr. Bell says it's just anxiety, but I know better. They've found me. I've moved everything to the safe place. Michael must never know what I did, but he needs to know who he is. If anyone ever reads this, know that what lies beneath the surface isn't what it seems. The truth is in the numbers. 24-16-8. Michael read the final entry again and again, his mind racing. Pain in her chest. Had she known something was wrong with her heart? Had she been afraid and not told him? And what were those numbers? They seemed familiar somehow, though he couldn't place them. He set the journal aside and continued searching the desk with new urgency. In the bottom drawer, hidden beneath hanging files, he found a small wooden box he'd never seen before. His fingers traced the simple carvings on its lid. swirling patterns that formed no particular image but felt somehow important. There was no keyhole, no obvious way to open it. Michael turned it over in his hands, feeling the solid weight of it. Something rattled inside. As he examined the bottom, he noticed 3 small dials set flush with the wood. A combination lock. The numbers from the journal, 24, 16 to 8. With trembling fingers, he turned each dial to the corresponding number. A soft click, and the lid loosened. He held his breath as he lifted it. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, a small key, and a faded photograph. The photo showed his mother, much younger than he'd ever seen her, standing with a man whose face had been carefully cut out of the picture. Between them, they held a baby. Michael felt a strange buzzing in his ears as he unfolded the paper. It was a birth certificate, his birth certificate, but different from the one he'd seen before. This one listed a different birthplace, and where his father's name should be, there was a name he didn't recognize. Robert Harlow. "That's not possible," he whispered to the empty room. His mother had always told him his father died before he was born. There were no photos, no stories, just the simple explanation that he'd been an only child raised by an only parent. It, too, had been enough. He'd stopped asking questions about his father sometime in elementary school. But now, staring at this document, at this unfamiliar name, Michael felt as if the floor was tilting beneath him. If she'd lied about this, what else had she lied about? The small key caught his attention again. It looked like it might fit a safety deposit box, or a storage unit. His mother had never mentioned having either. He tucked the key into his pocket and continued searching the office with new determination. In a folder labeled Garden Plans, he found receipts for a storage facility across town, paid annually for the past 30 years. The unit number matched the key tag, 17B. Outside, the rain had stopped, but darkness was falling. Michael knew he should wait until morning to investigate further, but the questions burning in his mind wouldn't allow him to rest. He grabbed his coat and the storage key and headed for his car. The storage facility was in an older part of town, rows of identical units with fading orange doors. The night manager barely looked up from his television show as Michael signed in, claiming to be accessing his mother's unit. Unit 17B was at the back corner, partially hidden by overgrown bushes. The key slid into the lock smoothly as if it had been recently used. The door groaned as he pulled it up, revealing a space about the size of a small bedroom, filled with cardboard boxes and furniture draped in sheets. Michael found the light, switch, and blinked as a single bulb illuminated the space. The air smelled stale and dusty, but not as abandoned as he'd expected. Someone had been here recently. He moved deeper into the unit, reading labels on boxes. Before, after, records, evidence. His confusion deepened with each label. Evidence of what? A large trunk sat against the back wall, secured with a padlock. Michael tried the storage key, but it didn't fit. He examined the trunk more closely and noticed another combination lock on the side. Would the same numbers work? He dialed 24, 16, 8, and the lock opened with a satisfying click. Inside the trunk, he found stacks of newspapers with headlines about a corporate scandal from 30 years ago. Beneath those were folders containing what looked like legal documents, financial records, and several passports, all with his mother's photo but different names. At the very bottom of the trunk lay a sealed envelope with his name written on it in his mother's handwriting. With fingers that wouldn't stop shaking, Michael tore it open. "My dearest Michael," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've found my journal. There's no easy way to tell you this, but everything you know about me, about us, has been carefully constructed. The woman you knew as your mother kept many secrets, and the biggest one is lying in her grave. Or rather, what isn't lying there. When the time comes, you'll understand what needs to be done. Trust no one until you know the whole truth." Michael read the letter twice more, his mind struggling to make sense of the words. What did she mean? What isn't lying there? A cold realization washed over him as pieces began falling into place. The cryptic journal entries, the fake documents, The evidence of a life he knew nothing about. He needed to see what was really in his mother's coffin. Michael didn't sleep that night. How could he? The documents from the storage unit lay spread across his kitchen table. Birth certificates, with different information, passports with his mother's face but different names, newspaper clippings about a corporate whistleblower who disappeared 3 decades ago. His entire life felt like a house of cards, collapsing with each new piece of information he uncovered. By morning, his eyes were red-rimmed, but his mind was clear. He needed answers, and there was only one place to get them. He picked up his phone and called the family lawyer, an older man named Paul Wilson, who had handled his mother's affairs for as long as Michael could remember. "I need to talk to you," Michael said when Paul answered. "It's about my mother. It's important." 2 hours later, Michael sat in Paul's office, a room that smelled of leather and old books. The lawyer's face was grave as Michael laid out what he had found: the journal, the storage unit, the letter. "I need to know what's in that coffin," Michael finished. "And I think you know more than you've told me." Paul removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He suddenly looked much older than his 65 years. "Your mother was a complicated woman, Michael. She made me promise never to tell you certain things unless—" He trailed off, looking at the documents Michael had brought. "Unless what?" Michael pressed. "Unless you found her journal and came asking these specific questions." Paul sighed deeply. "She knew someday you might need to know the truth." "So tell me the truth," Michael said, leaning forward. Paul shook his head. "Not yet. First, you need to understand what you're asking for. Exhuming a body isn't like in the movies. There are laws, permits, court orders needed. And even if we could arrange it, are you sure you want to know? Some truths can't be unlearned." Michael's jaw tightened. "I've spent my entire life believing in a lie. Whatever the truth is, I need to know it." "Very well." Paul pulled a folder from his desk drawer. "Your mother left this with me. Inside is everything you'll need to begin the process. But I warn you, this path won't be easy. There are people who don't want these secrets unearthed, literally or figuratively." The folder contained legal documents already filled out: an application for exhumation, affidavits about potential identity fraud, even the name of a judge who might be sympathetic to the case. "She planned for this," Michael whispered, flipping through the papers. "Your mother planned for everything," Paul replied quietly. "It's how she stayed alive all these years." The next weeks passed in a blur of legal offices, courtrooms, and endless waiting. Michael's request to exhume his mother's body was met with expected resistance from the cemetery board and unexpected opposition from a law firm he'd never heard of, representing interested parties who remained unnamed. His cousin Beth called him one evening, her voice tight with concern. "The family thinks you've lost your mind, Michael. Aunt Linda hasn't been gone 3 months and you want to dig her up? What good could possibly come from this?" "I can't explain it yet," Michael said, pacing his kitchen. "But I promise there's more going on than anyone realizes." "You need to let her rest in peace," Beth insisted. "This isn't healthy." Maybe she was right. Maybe grief had twisted his mind, making him see conspiracies where there were none. But then he would reread his mother's journal, look at those documents, and his certainty would return. Something wasn't right, and he needed to know what. Month after filing the initial paperwork, Michael was called to the office of Judge Harriet Green. He had expected another hearing, more arguments from the opposing lawyers. Instead, he found only the judge, Paul, and a court clerk. Judge Green was a stern-faced woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. She studied Michael over her reading, glasses for a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Parker, I've reviewed your petition thoroughly. In my 30 years on the bench, I've only granted exhumation orders in extreme circumstances, criminal investigations, identification of remains, that sort of thing." She tapped a folder on her desk. "Your case is unusual." Michael held his breath, preparing for another rejection. "However," she continued, "the evidence of potential identity fraud is compelling, and I received a sealed letter this morning that has Let's say it has convinced me this matter deserves investigation. She slid a document across her desk. I'm granting your petition. The exhumation will take place tomorrow at dawn, with minimal personnel present. Michael stared at the paper, hardly believing what he was hearing. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me yet. She cut him off. I'm not sure you understand what you're about to do. Opening a grave is not just a legal matter. It's crossing a threshold few people should. Whatever you find, Mr. Parker, you'll have to live with it. Outside the courthouse, Paul grabbed Michael's arm. We need to talk, he said, guiding him to a nearby park bench. When they were seated, Paul looked around to ensure no one was within earshot. There's something I haven't told you, Paul said, his voice barely above a whisper. The day after your mother's funeral, I received a phone call. The caller didn't identify himself, but he knew things, private things about your mother's arrangements. He told me to make sure no one ever disturbed her grave. Was it a threat? Michael asked. Not explicitly, but the message was clear. Paul handed Michael a small device that looked like a pager. Your mother gave me this years ago. She said if you ever found yourself in real danger, you should press this button 3 times. She wouldn't tell me what it does, only that it would bring help. Michael took the device, turning it over in his hands. Did you tell the judge about the call? Paul shook his head. No, but I suspect the letter she mentioned came from someone who knows what's really going on. He stood up. I've arranged everything for tomorrow. A private pathologist, cemetery workers, I trust. Be at the cemetery at 5:30 a.m. and Michael... He hesitated. Be careful. Whatever your mother was involved in, it was serious enough that she spent decades hiding from it. That night, Michael couldn't eat. He paced his mother's house, jumping, at every creak and gust of wind. At one point, he thought he saw headlights slow down in front of the house, but they moved on. Paranoia, he told himself, though he double-checked all the locks anyway. He tried to sleep but gave up around 3 a.m. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table, reading his mother's journal again, looking for clues he might have missed. One entry from 15 years ago caught his attention. Michael asked about his father again today. I told him the same story, that he died before Michael was born. The lie gets easier to tell each time, but the guilt doesn't lessen. Someday he'll learn that his father didn't die all those years ago. In some ways, it would have been easier if he had. His father was alive, or had been at least 15 years ago. Michael's hands trembled as he turned the page, but the next entry said nothing more about his father. At 4:30 a.m., Michael showered and dressed in the dark. As he was about to leave, he remembered the device Paul had given him. He slipped it into his pocket, hoping he wouldn't need to use it. The cemetery was shrouded in fog when Michael arrived. A small group waited by the entrance. Paul, a woman in a medical coat who must be the pathologist, 2 cemetery workers with shovels, and a police officer who nodded at Michael as he approached. Officer Chen is here as a legal witness, Paul explained. Judge's orders. They walked in silence to Linda Parker's grave. The headstone was simple, just as she had requested. Beloved Mother, it read, with her name and dates. Michael wondered now if even those dates were lies. We're ready when you are, sir, one of the cemetery workers said quietly. Michael took a deep breath, the morning air cold in his lungs. Was he really going to do this? Disturb his mother's rest based on cryptic journals and mysterious documents? But it wasn't really about disturbing her rest, was it? It was about finding the truth. If his mother had been running from something, or someone, her whole life, he needed to know why. He needed to know who she really was, who he really was. Do it, he said finally. Open the grave. The sound of shovels cutting into earth filled the quiet morning air. Michael stood a few feet back from his mother's grave, arms wrapped around, himself against the chill. Each thud of dirt being removed felt like a heartbeat, counting down to a moment he couldn't fully imagine. Officer Chen stood beside him, her face professionally blank. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly. Michael nodded without looking at her. I have to know. The cemetery workers moved with practiced efficiency, their shovels finding a rhythm as the hole grew deeper. The fog had begun to lift, but the rising sun remained hidden behind heavy clouds. The small group stood in silence, their breath creating small clouds in the cold air. After what seemed like both forever and no time at all, one of the workers looked up. "We've reached the vault, sir." Michael stepped forward. In the hole, he could see the concrete burial vault that protected the coffin from the weight of the earth. The workers positioned straps around it, then attached them to a small mechanical lift they had brought. "This will take a minute," one worker explained. "We need to raise it carefully." The machine hummed to life, and slowly the concrete vault began to rise from the earth. It emerged inch by inch, gray and solemn against the dark soil. When it was finally free of the grave, the workers guided it to rest on the ground nearby. The pathologist, Dr. Winters, approached. She was a petite woman with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed at odds with her profession. "Mr. Parker, before we open the vault, I want to prepare you. Your mother has been buried for nearly 3 months. The condition of the remains may be difficult to see." Michael swallowed hard. "I understand." Dr. Winters nodded to the workers who began removing the heavy concrete lid of the vault. It took both men to slide it aside, revealing the polished wood of the casket inside. "The casket seems intact," Dr. Winters observed. "No signs of water, damage, or other issues." Michael stared at the coffin that supposedly held his mother's remains. It looked exactly as it had the day of the funeral, a simple but elegant wooden casket with brass handles. Had it really only been 3 months? It felt like a lifetime ago. "Proceed," Paul instructed the workers. With reverent movements, they lifted the casket from the vault and placed it on a tarp spread nearby. Everyone gathered around as Dr. Winters stepped forward. "Mr. Parker, as the next of kin, you should be the one to authorize the opening," she said. Michael took a deep breath. Part of him wanted to walk away, to preserve the memory of his mother, as she had been in life. But the secrets, the lies, they hung between him and any peace he might find. He had come too far to turn back now. "Open it," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Dr. Winters nodded to the workers who moved to unlock the casket's seals. The sound of metal clasps releasing seemed unnaturally loud in the morning stillness. Michael's heart hammered in his chest as the lid began to rise. He had prepared himself for many possibilities. A body that wasn't his mother's, no body at all, or some other shocking revelation. What he hadn't prepared for was the coffin's actual contents. Instead of a body, the casket contained several sandbags arranged in a human shape, covered by a burial shroud. Beside them lay a sealed plastic container about the size of a shoebox. "Officer," Chen let out a soft gasp. "What the hell?" Michael stepped forward, staring in disbelief. "There's no body," he said, his voice hollow with shock. "She's not here." Dr. Winters leaned over the casket, examining the contents without touching anything. "This was deliberately arranged to approximate the weight and shape of a human body," she observed. "Someone went to great lengths to make this appear normal during the funeral." Paul's face had gone pale. "I was at the funeral home with her, or who I thought was her. I identified the body. How is this possible?" Michael's mind raced. If this wasn't his mother in the casket, then where was she? Was she truly dead? Had she faked her own death? And if so, why? Officer Chen was already on her phone, calling it in. "We need detectives at Oakwood Cemetery immediately. We have a situation with unusual circumstances." "The container," Michael said suddenly, pointing to the plastic box. "We need to see what's inside." Dr. Winters pulled on a pair of latex gloves. "Let me. We need to preserve any evidence." Carefully, she lifted the container from the casket and placed it on the tarp. The lid was sealed with tape, but not locked. With deliberate movements, she removed the tape and opened the box. Inside was a USB drive, a manila envelope, and a handwritten note on top. Dr. Winters read it aloud. "Michael, If you're reading this, you've discovered the truth, or at least part of it. What happens next depends on choices I made long ago. The envelope contains what you need to understand. The drive contains what you need to prove it. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone is who they seem to be. The note was signed simply, Mom. Michael felt the world tilt beneath him. Her handwriting, her words. This wasn't some elaborate hoax. His mother had planned this. I need to see what's in that envelope, Michael said, reaching for it. Officer Chen raised a hand. Hold on. This is now a police matter. We need to secure all of this as evidence. Evidence of what? Michael demanded. My mother isn't missing. She clearly planned whatever this is. That note is addressed to me. Those things belong to me. Actually, Paul interjected, as her lawyer, I can confirm that Mrs. Parker left. Explicit instructions that any items found in her coffin were to be given directly to Michael, regardless of circumstances. I have the paperwork in my car. Officer Chen frowned. This isn't standard procedure. Neither is finding sandbags in a coffin, Paul countered. But I suggest we all take a step back and consider what's happening here. There's no evidence of a crime yet. Unusual, yes, but not clearly criminal. After a tense moment, Officer Chen nodded reluctantly. Fine, but I need to document everything before anyone takes anything. While she photographed the coffin and its contents, Michael stood to the side, his mind spinning with questions. The woman he knew as his mother, who had packed his lunches, helped with homework, taught him to drive, had orchestrated all of this. Had their entire life together been part of some elaborate deception? When Officer Chen finally finished, Dr. Winters handed the envelope to Michael. Would you like some privacy? Michael shook his head. No. Whatever this is, I want witnesses. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope and pulled out several documents. The first was a newspaper article from 30 years ago about a corporate whistleblower named Claire Thompson, who had exposed massive fraud at a pharmaceutical company called Northfield Labs. The company had falsified safety data for a drug that later caused birth defects in hundreds of children. Claire Thompson had provided evidence that executives knew about the problems, but pushed the drug through anyway. The second document was a death certificate for Claire Thompson, dated just days after the article was published. The third was a photograph of a young woman who looked remarkably like his mother, standing next to a man whose face Michael instantly recognized from family photos. His grandfather, Thomas Parker. I don't understand, Michael said, looking up at Paul. Was my mother this Claire Thompson? Did she fake her death back then? Paul took the documents, studying them with a frown. I knew your mother as Linda Parker for over 25 years. I never knew anything about this. There's something else, Michael said, pulling a final sheet from the envelope. It was a handwritten letter, longer than the note in the box. My dearest Michael, it began. By now you know that Linda Parker was not who she claimed to be. I was born Claire Thompson, and in my previous life, I worked as a research scientist at Northfield Labs. What I discovered there destroyed my life and created yours. The drug I helped develop caused terrible harm, but that wasn't the worst of it. When I found evidence that company executives had hidden the dangers, I couldn't stay silent. I thought going public would bring justice. Instead, it brought danger. 2 days after the story broke, someone broke into my apartment and tried to kill me. The police said it was a random burglary, but I knew better. With the help of your grandfather, my Uncle Thomas, I disappeared. Linda Parker, his sister who had died as a child, became my new identity. I thought I was safe, then I met your father. He was kind and good, and for a while I believed I could have a normal life. But when you were born, I realized the danger hadn't passed. Northfield had been bought by a larger company, but the people responsible were still out there, still powerful. Your father wanted to go to the police to fight, we argued. The night he left, he promised to return with help. He never came back. For years I searched for him in secret, until I found evidence that made me believe he had been silenced permanently. But recently, I discovered something that changed everything. Your father might still be alive. The flash drive contains information about where to look. I've set things in motion that will either bring us all together or put this to rest forever. I'm sorry for the lies, Michael. Everything else, every bedtime story, every birthday celebration, every proud moment, that was all real. I loved you with my whole heart. That was never a lie. Be careful. Trust Paul, but tell no one else what you found. And if you decide to look for your father, remember that those who wanted me silenced are still out there. Michael looked up. From the letter, his vision blurred with tears. She's alive, he whispered. And my father might be too. Before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the morning quiet. 2 unmarked police cars pulled up to the cemetery gates. Paul grabbed Michael's arm. Put everything back in the envelope, now. Why? What's wrong? Michael asked, seeing the sudden alarm on Paul's face. Because I don't recognize those detectives, Paul said quietly. And your mother warned us to be careful who we trust. Michael quickly stuffed the documents back into the envelope as the 2 unmarked cars pulled to a stop near the gravesite. His heart raced as he slipped the envelope inside his jacket, keeping the USB drive clenched in his palm. What should we do? He whispered to Paul. Let me handle this, Paul replied, straightening his tie. Officer Chen is already here as an official witness. Just stay calm. 4 men in suits stepped out of the cars. The tallest one, a broad-shouldered man with silver hair at his temples, approached with an air of authority. I'm Detective Sullivan, he announced, flashing a badge. We received a report about an unauthorized exhumation. His eyes swept over the open grave, the casket, and the small group gathered around it. Officer Chen stepped forward. Not unauthorized. Detective, I'm Officer Chen. I'm here as a court-appointed witness. Judge Green signed the order. She held out a copy of the document. Sullivan barely glanced at it. We'll need to verify that. In the meantime, I'd like to know what exactly is going on here. Paul introduced himself as the family lawyer and gestured to Michael. This is Michael Parker, Linda Parker's son. He petitioned for this exhumation based on evidence suggesting his mother's identity may have been falsified. Sullivan's eyes narrowed as he looked at Michael. And what did you find? Michael hesitated, his mother's warning echoing in his mind. These men had appeared too quickly, too conveniently. How had they known about the exhumation? Nothing conclusive, Paul answered before Michael could speak. Some personal items Mrs. Parker wanted her son to have. It's a private family matter. A private family matter that required exhuming a body? Another detective, a leaner man with cold eyes, stepped forward. That seems unusual. Dr. Winters, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. As the medical examiner present, I can tell you that we found nothing that suggests any criminal activity. Mrs. Parker simply left some personal effects for her son. The detective's gaze shifted to the open casket. And the body? A tense silence fell over the group. Michael felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. There is no body, Officer Chen finally said. The casket contains weighted material, sandbags. The detectives exchanged glances. No body? Sullivan repeated. That changes things. This is now potentially a missing persons case, or worse. My mother wasn't abducted, Michael said, finding his voice. Whatever happened, she planned it herself. Sullivan turned his attention fully to Michael. And how would you know that, Mr. Parker? Before Michael could answer, the sound of another approaching vehicle cut through the tension. A black SUV with government plates pulled up, and a woman in a crisp pantsuit stepped out. She walked purposefully toward the group, her badge already in hand. Agent Diane Reynolds, FBI, she announced. This cemetery is now under federal jurisdiction. I'm going to have to ask local law enforcement to stand down. Sullivan bristled. On what grounds? This is a local matter. National security, Agent Reynolds replied coolly. That's all I'm at liberty to say at this time. She turned to Michael and Paul. Mr. Parker, Mr. Wilson, I need you both to come. With me. Michael looked at Paul, who gave him a subtle nod. What about the evidence? Detective Sullivan demanded, gesturing to the casket. My team will secure everything, Agent Reynolds said as 2 more agents emerged from the SUV. Officer Chen can stay as a witness if she wishes. The local detectives looked unhappy, but eventually backed down in the face of federal authority. Michael felt a wave of relief as Agent Reynolds led him and Paul toward her vehicle, away from the increasingly hostile detectives. Once they were inside the SUV and driving away, Michael turned to Agent Reynolds. "Are you really FBI, or is this part of whatever my mother was involved in?" The agent glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Smart question. The badge is real, but this isn't an official FBI operation." She handed him a folded note. "Your mother gave this to my supervisor 8 years ago. She said to give it to you if you ever discovered her secret." Michael unfolded the note with trembling fingers. In his mother's handwriting, it simply read, "The hummingbird knows where the flowers hide. 24-16-8. The same numbers from her journal," Michael whispered. "What's our destination?" Paul asked the agent. "Somewhere safe," she replied. "Those weren't regular detectives back there. They work for Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the company that bought Northfield Labs 30 years ago." Michael's mind reeled. "How did they know about the exhumation?" "They've been watching your mother's grave since the funeral," Agent Reynolds explained. "And they've probably been watching you too." "Why would a pharmaceutical company care about my mother after all this time?" Michael asked. "The scandal was 30 years ago." "Because it wasn't just about the defective drug," Reynolds said. "Your mother discovered something much worse before she disappeared. Evidence of illegal testing, bribes to government officials, and connections to organized crime. The people involved went on to become some of the most powerful figures in the industry. If that evidence ever came to light, it would destroy them," Paul finished. They drove in silence for several minutes, leaving the city behind. Michael clutched the USB drive in his hand, wondering what secrets it contained. "The drive," he said suddenly. "Do you have a computer I can use?" "My mother left this in the coffin." Agent Reynolds glanced back again. "We'll be at the safe house in 20 minutes. You can view it there." The safe house turned out to be a modest cabin tucked away in the woods outside the city. Inside, it was surprisingly modern, with security, systems and communications equipment that seemed out of place in the rustic setting. "Make yourselves comfortable," Agent Reynolds said, gesturing to the living area. "The computer is in the office through that door. It's secure and isolated from any networks." Michael went straight to the office, Paul following close behind. He plugged in the USB drive with shaking hands. The drive contained only 2 files, a video and a document labeled Evidence. He clicked on the video file first. His mother's face filled the screen, and Michael gasped. The recording was dated just 2 weeks before her supposed death. "Michael," she began, her familiar voice sending a wave of emotion through him. "If you're watching this, then you've found the truth, or at least part of it. I'm not dead. At least I hope I'm not. By now you know I've been living under a false identity. What you don't know is why I've chosen to disappear again." She looked tired in the video, with new lines around her eyes that Michael hadn't noticed before. "3 months ago, I received an anonymous message with a photo of your father. The message claimed he was alive and being held against his will. At first, I thought it was a trap, but I've spent weeks verifying the information. I believe it's true." She leaned closer to the camera. "Your father didn't abandon us, Michael. He was taken, and now I have a chance to find him. But to do that, I needed to disappear completely, even from you. I'm sorry for the pain this has caused you, but it was the only way to keep you safe. The people who took your father are watching me. They always have been. Faking my death was the only way to get them to stop, to give me the freedom to move without being followed. The evidence file contains everything I've gathered about your father's location and the people responsible." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I'll succeed, or if I'll ever see you again, but I had to try. He's been their prisoner for 30 years, Michael. 30 years while I raised you thinking he was dead." She wiped her eyes and continued, her voice stronger. "If I don't come back, take the evidence to Agent Reynolds. She's the only one I trust in the agency. And Michael, be careful. These people are powerful and desperate. They'll do anything to keep their secrets buried." The video ended, leaving Michael staring at a blank screen. His father alive. His mother out there somewhere trying to rescue him. It was almost too much to process. "Michael," Paul said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Are you all right?" Before he could answer, Agent Reynolds appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. "We have a problem. Someone followed us. We need to move now." Michael quickly copied the evidence file to another drive the agent handed him. "What about my mother? How do I find her?" "The answer's in that note she left you," Reynolds said, already gathering equipment. "The hummingbird knows where the flowers hide. It's a code." Michael's mind raced, trying to make sense of the cryptic message. Then it hit him. The hummingbird feeder. His mother had kept one outside her kitchen window for as long as he could remember. Every spring she would hang fresh flowers nearby to attract them. "I know where she is," Michael said. "Or at least where she left another clue. We need to go back to her house." A crash from the front of the cabin cut the conversation short. Reynolds drew her weapon. "Too late, they're here." The crash at the front door was followed by the sound of breaking glass. Agent Reynolds motioned for Michael and Paul to stay down. "There's a back exit through the pantry," she whispered. "Get to your car and drive to the secondary location I mentioned on the way here." "I'm not leaving you here," Michael protested. Reynolds gave him a stern look. "The evidence is what matters. If they get it, your parents died for nothing." She pressed a set of keys into his hand. "My car has a tracking blocker. Take it. I'll create a diversion." Paul tugged at Michael's arm. "She's right, we need to go." With one last look at Reynolds, who was already moving toward the front of the cabin, Michael followed Paul through the kitchen and into a small pantry. Behind a shelf of canned goods, a narrow door led out into the woods. They slipped outside, just as shouting erupted from within the cabin, followed by gunshots. "This way," Paul whispered, leading Michael through the trees toward where Reynolds had parked her SUV. The forest floor was damp, muffling their footsteps as they moved as quickly as they dared. They reached the vehicle and climbed in, Michael's hands shaking as he started the engine. "We can't just leave her," he said, glancing back toward the cabin. "She made her choice," Paul said firmly. "We honor it by staying alive and finishing what your mother started." Michael gripped the steering wheel tightly, then nodded and put the car in drive. They took a different road than the one they'd arrived on, winding deeper into the forested area before eventually connecting with a main highway. "The secondary location," Michael said after they'd been driving for about 20 minutes. "Where is it?" "An old boathouse by Lake Wilson," Paul replied. "Reynolds said it belongs to a retired agent. We should be safe there for a few hours at least." Michael drove in tense silence, constantly checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. His mind raced with everything he'd learned. His mother was alive. His father, a man he'd never known, had been held prisoner for 3 decades. And now people were shooting at them to keep these secrets buried. "I still don't understand why," he said finally. "It's been 30 years since that drug scandal. Why would anyone still care enough to kill for it?" Paul was quiet for a moment. "It's not about the drug itself anymore. It's about the people involved. Think about it. If your mother's evidence proves that current industry leaders and government officials were complicit in covering up deaths and illegal testing, the entire pharmaceutical regulatory system would be called into question. Billions of dollars, dozens of careers, countless reputations, all would be destroyed." The boathouse was a small, weathered structure set back from the shore of Lake Wilson, hidden by a stand of pine trees. Michael parked the SUV behind the building out of sight from the road. Inside, the boathouse was surprisingly comfortable, with a small living area, kitchenette, and what looked like a ham radio set up in one corner. Paul immediately went to check the radio while Michael paced the room, the USB drive clutched in his hand. "We need to look at the evidence file," he said. "We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Paul nodded, gesturing to a laptop on a small desk. "Use that. It should be secure." The evidence file was massive. Hundreds of documents, photographs, and video clips meticulously organized and labeled. Michael scrolled through folders labeled Test Subjects, Financial Records, and government connections. "This is unbelievable," he murmured as he opened files at random. They tested experimental drugs on prisoners without consent. They bribed FDA officials. Oh my God. He had opened a folder titled Peter Parker, his father's name. Inside was a series of photographs showing a man in what looked like a medical facility, hooked up to various machines. The most recent photo was dated just 3 months ago. "They've been using him as a test subject all these years," Michael said, his voice breaking. "They never stopped the illegal testing. They just hid it better." Paul leaned over his shoulder, examining the photographs. "There's location data embedded in these images. Your mother must have traced them to find where they're keeping him." Michael opened another file, a map with a location circled in red. "Meridian Research Facility. It's less than 100 miles from here. That must be where your mother went," Paul said. Michael continued searching through the files until he found a document titled Extraction Plan. His mother had detailed a way to get inside the facility, including security rotations, access, codes, and a building layout. "She was planning a rescue mission," Michael said in disbelief. "Alone." "Not necessarily alone," Paul replied, pointing to a notation at the bottom of the document. "HB confirmed. Arrival date 5/15. "HB," Michael repeated. "The hummingbird from her note?" Before Paul could respond, the radio in the corner crackled. "To life. Base to hummingbird. Come in," a voice said through static. "Repeat. Base to hummingbird." Michael and Paul exchanged glances before Paul moved to the radio and picked up the microphone. "This is base," he said hesitantly. "Identify yourself." There was a pause, then, "Paul, is that you? Where's Reynolds?" "Who is this?" Paul demanded. "It's me, Linda," the voice replied. "Or Claire. I suppose you know that now." "Is Michael with you?" Michael rushed to the radio, taking the microphone from Paul's hand. "Mom, is that really you?" "Michael," his mother's voice softened. "Yes, it's me. Are you safe? Where's Agent Reynolds?" Michael quickly explained what had happened at the cabin. "We don't know if she made it out," he finished. "She's tough," his mother said. "She might still be okay. Listen, Michael, I don't have much time. Did you find the evidence file?" "Yes, I have it, Mom. I saw the photos of Dad. Is he really alive? Have they been keeping him prisoner all these years?" "Yes," she answered, her voice tight with emotion. When he discovered what they were doing 30 years ago, he wanted to go to the authorities. They couldn't let that happen, but they also recognized his value as a research scientist, so they kept him. "And you've been looking for him all this time?" "Not exactly. For years, I believed he was dead. It wasn't until last year that I found evidence suggesting otherwise. That's when I started planning everything, including your fake death," Michael said. "I'm sorry for putting you through that," she replied. "But I needed them to believe I was gone so I could move freely. It was the only way." "Where are you now?" There was a pause. "I can't say over the radio, but I'm close to finding your father. The extraction is happening tonight." "Tonight?" Michael said in alarm. "Mom, you can't do this alone. These people are dangerous." "I'm not alone," she assured him. "I have help. But I need you to do something for me. The evidence needs to be secured and delivered to the right people. There's a contact at the Justice Department. Her information is in the file under contingency. If anything happens to me, she needs to get everything." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Michael insisted, "because I'm coming to help you." "Absolutely not," his mother said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "They're already trying to kill me," Michael argued, "and he's my father. I have every right to help rescue him." Another voice spoke in the background on his mother's end, too muffled to make out the words. "I have to go," she said hurriedly. "Michael, promise me you'll stay with Paul and keep the evidence safe." Before he could respond, the radio went dead. Michael turned to Paul, determination written across his face. "I'm going after her." Paul shook his head. "Your mother is right. The evidence is what matters most. Without it, None of this means anything. Then you take it to the Justice Department, Michael said, already reaching for his jacket. I can't sit here while my parents are in danger. And how exactly do you plan to find them? Paul asked. Or get into a secure research facility? Michael turned back to the laptop, opening the extraction plan his mother had created. She's laid it all out here. Security codes, guard rotations, everything. And as for finding them, he pulled out his phone, opening a tracking app. Remember that device you gave me? The one my mother left with you? It wasn't just for emergencies, it was a tracker. On the screen, a small blue dot blinked steadily. She's 8 miles from here, heading north. Paul looked at the phone, then at Michael's determined face. He sighed deeply. Your mother is going to kill me for this, but I'm coming with you. You'll need backup. 30 minutes later, they were parked on a ridge overlooking the Meridian Research Facility, a sprawling complex surrounded by high fences and security cameras. Through binoculars, Michael could see guards patrolling the perimeter. According to Mom's plan, there's a service entrance on the east side with lighter security, he said, studying the facility. And the guard shift changes at 10 p.m. That's our window. I still think this is insane, Paul muttered, checking his watch. We have 2 hours to prepare. 2 hours until I meet my father for the first time, Michael said quietly, after believing he was dead my entire life. Paul squeezed his shoulder. If he's anything like your mother, he's going to be incredibly proud of you. As the sun began to set behind the facility, Michael thought about everything that had led him to this moment. The journal, the storage unit, the empty coffin. His entire life had been built on secrets and lies, yet somehow, here at the end of it all, he felt like he was finally discovering the truth. They wanted the truth to stay buried, he said, watching the lights come on across the facility. But some truths refused to stay in the ground.